Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. If you're here last week, welcome back, and sorry about the technical issues. But Paul's had a good word with British Telecom, and he's also had a week to practice his speech, so he's ready to go. Now, but seriously, we want this to be quite fluent. We like our webinars to be quite organic and go with the flow. So anyone on tonight, if you get questions or discussion points, we want to hear from you. And basically, the way it's going to work, if you want to say something or contribute something, just put a little chat in the box and say, hi, I've got a question, or you can type what your question is. And I'll just put it over to Paul. I'll basically wait until there's a good time in the discussion. Okay, so let me just share my screen to get the slides up. Apologies. Okay, try that again. Okay. Right. So we're calling this the science, the art, and the philosophy of functional sports nutrition. And the reason we've termed it that is because you've got science within sports nutrition, and the whole industry is kind of based on that. But when you become a practitioner, you start building a kind of art form and philosophies around, you know, all the myths and misconceptions that fly around. And when you've had a few years of experience, you start really dealing with clients as individuals. Ideally, you should right from the start, but you know, it gets more as you get older and more experienced. And whenever I read anything Paul has to say or listen to anything he lectures about, the stuff he comes out with is very much voice of experience. A lot of philosophical thought and science, but a hell of a lot of experience in what he says. So he's been, as he calls it, at the coalface for a good 20 plus years, and he's got a lot of good things to say. So I'll let him explain what the kind of beyond functional thinking is that he's talking about. Oh, one last point. This little quote here I've just started kind of using. The course CISN is kind of built by practitioners for practitioners, and Paul's a really good case in point here. Okay, Paul, over to you.
Okay, Ian, thank you very much. First of all, if I can just apologise for last week and my drop-off of internet. It was totally me and BT, so there was nothing at all that Ian had any control over. So I apologise for that. Thank you all very much for joining in. Really nice to see some names. Lovely to see you again, brother. So I hope we'll now on almost sort of like each of these subjects. So this is going to be a fairly quick sort of like trip through, but the objectives, or some of the objectives that I'm going to be looking at here, is to really look beyond the what I call sort of nuts and bolts of what we do. That's the training, the actual nutrition of our clients, the health of our clients. We're trying to look beyond that. We hopefully will also be examining our own skill sets and asking the question, just what is our role in actually dealing with clients? So one aspect of that we will be majoring on, are we health practitioners? Are we performance coaches? Are we a combination of the two? And if we are, to what extent? The examination of our skill sets, Ian mentioned about life experience, and I think the two are sort of like totally linked. I think it's very hard to look at all of the things that we'll be discussing in the first year or so of actually being in practice gradually you learn, gradually you move, gradually you tend to look at your clients in a slightly sort of like different way. So if we could have the first slide, maybe.
Okay.
So the first thing that I really want to look at, I don't want to talk too much about myself because that could go on for a while, but just putting down some of the very basics, I think that will give you some idea of where I'm coming from, and it will give you a little insight to my life experience and my background and how much of this has actually sort of helped shape my thinking. So could we start filling this in, Ian, please? So these are the things that all of you will know from the functional medicine model. So we've got a very basic timeline down here, and prenatal, everything was absolutely fine, very healthy pregnancy, natural birth, breastfed. So back in 1958, when I actually popped out, natural birth was very much the thing, as was being sort of like breastfed. A lot of the formula stuff came on quite a bit later. Okay, can we knock on a little bit more, Ian, please? So this is an interesting part of it. Now, when I was at school, now bear in mind there weren't even mobile phones then, let alone sort of like social media, and I can honestly not remember one incidence of classmates self-harming, being away from school with anxiety or depression. I can't honestly remember one incidence of eating disorders. And people are very quick to throw around statistics these days to say that, what's it, 1 in 4, 1 in 5 school children have got mental health issues. Now, either something has gone seriously wrong, or we are putting labels on people that we shouldn't be. And I do think social media has got an awful lot to actually do with this. Okay, in a few more, please, Ian. So it was a very old-fashioned childhood. Yeah, we walked to school, no such thing as the school run then, very much home-cooked food. There were such things as local butchers, fishmongers, bakers, greengrocers. I'm not saying everything that we ate was perfectly healthy, but we certainly always came home to a home-cooked meal. And from memory, the only takeaways that we had at the time were fish and chips. So there was none of the plethora of takeaways that we've actually got now. Okay, a bit more, please. Yeah, my school days were fun. I had a great time. I think I came away with 1 GCSE and a stripe for swimming the width. So I wouldn't say that I exactly excelled academically. And in those days, it was very easy to walk into work, which is exactly what I did in the financial sector of the City of London. This is when I started to actually pull my own finger out and buckle down to my own work and actually obtain a financial services degree. And at the end of things, I rose to the point of being a director of a financial services company. And this, doing my own study, has very much been a reoccurring theme. Okay, a bit more, please. This is very much the other side of things. The good part of it is that I met my wife, and we've been together well over 30 years now. And again, both my mum and dad until the death of my father, and Kim's mum and dad up until the death of her father, have both been together for about sort of like 50 odd years. I also played guitar extremely badly in a rock band, but I also embraced the lifestyle with a great deal of enthusiasm. So I'm very pleased I actually went through that when I did, rather than some sort of crazy midlife crisis. But I started to get into my physical training at about this time as well. First of all, as a judo player, and gradually that started to actually turn over to more resistance training. We skipped through very quickly till when I was 40, and that was my first ever bodybuilding show. This was also my midlife crisis, and I gave up everything in the City of London, took myself back to uni, retrained as a personal trainer, and opened my own personal training business. So we're now 20 years further down the line, and everything's still running. So everything's been moving along quite nicely. Okay. When I was 50, I won the British Bodybuilding Championships, and I've been competing ever since I was 40. And then I started to get involved. Now, this was very much bro science as far as my own training was concerned. Everything was very much sort of like bro science. It wasn't academic at all. And then there was a few light bulb moments that actually happened. I first became involved with a training group called Super Training, which was based on Mel Sif's work. I don't know how many of you, Ian will certainly remember Mel. I don't know how many others actually will. Mel was a very eccentric strength and conditioning coach, extremely clever guy. And it was through that group that I first met Pete Williams. And all of a sudden, a lot of light bulbs started to actually sort of like fire off. A little bit further down the line was when I met people such as Ian, Kane, being another one who's been a big influence on me. I'll be the first to admit that, Mr. Leatham. Amaru, Cadogan was another one. And all of a sudden, I started to embrace a lot more on the academic side. So what I'm trying to show here is that my background is probably a little bit different to a lot of people's here, merely by dint of my age and how I grew up. You know, at the age of 14, 15, we were still putting jumpers on the floor and using them as goalposts when we played football. There wasn't the pressure there to actually be grown up, to be part of a gang, to be dealing drugs, and God knows what else is actually sort of going on at the moment. They were very innocent times when I was growing up, but it means that my technological knowledge is pretty poor, as both Ian and Simone will testify to. But there were an awful lot of good things which actually came out of that. And as I say, I very much was using at the cold face, to use Ian's phrase, bro science. And then it's only really been in the last 10 years or so that everything academically has really fallen into place. And this is shaping the sort of practitioner that is sort of like sitting before you at the moment. We could...
I think a good... Sorry to butt in, Paul. I think a good thing to point out there is it's a kind of representation of how the journey of a practitioner shapes the way that you actually work with the clients. It's not just a formulation. We can go through university degrees, we can go through certain qualifications, but we are the person that we are with the qualifications woven in. And you've done the kind of bro science first and then the academic later. I've done the kind of opposite, where you start academically and actually build the experience into the way you're working and bring the philosophy in later. So yeah, the journey of all practitioners is very, very key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of our timelines will be different. And I think our own personal ecosystems will actually influence exactly how we do work and our relationships, not only with our clients, but other practitioners, which we will come on to, et cetera, et cetera. So every single one of us here is going to be slightly different. And I think this is why it's so important. Again, something hopefully we'll touch on if we get time a little bit later. why it's so important to actually lay down a support system for ourselves. We can't possibly know it all. It's important to actually bounce things off of other people and just to have that support system around you. I think it's horrible thinking that you're working in isolation. It's a very, very lonely place trying to work with clients in sort of like splendid isolation. But as I say, if we get time, we'll touch on all of these as we go through. Okay, and if we can pop the next one up, please. Go to the next slide, Ian, please. Lovely. Okay, this is the start of the analogy that I'm drawing on ecosystems. And this is how we can start. And this is looking very, very sort of narrow beam. This is very sharp focus. This is, the analogy is that the client is the tree. And you can see from this wonderful little slide, you can actually tell quite a lot from the growth rings of looking at sort of like one tree. And as it says on here, you can tell the first year growth, you can tell when there's a rainy season, a dry season, a forest fire. Now you can put that analogy to our client, and when we're going through the first assessment with them, we will talk about what I called the nuts and bolts before. We can talk about their training, how they periodise their training, the modes of training that they actually use. We can talk about their nutrition. We can talk about macro, micro nutriments. We can talk about balances. We can talk about ergogenic aids. But this is very, very small, narrow beam stuff individual to that client. We can talk about their current health. We can talk about their historic health. And what we will get there is a picture of a client that we can most definitely use and actually move forward. But the client is so much more than that. But these are the things that we will find out probably, and it will take time to get the trust of a client. You're not going to get all of the other stuff straight away. So this is where we start, and then gradually over a period of time, then the various other things start to sort of like fall into place. And Ian, if we can punch the next one up, please. And this is just another example of, I'm just taking one thing. And so we could talk about the nuts and bolts, you know, for the next hour quite easily. This is just, I think most of you will be aware of the functional medicine matrix and the way that we link various systems to disease and how they interrelate. And this is an exercise matrix. And if I nicked this from you, Kane, I do apologise. I may well have done. So I'll get that one in straight away. But all of our clients will fit into this matrix, but in different ways. So if you take me and Ian as two examples, myself as a power athlete, as a bodybuilder, then obviously you would be looking at strength, you would be looking at power, probably as sort of prerequisites of it. Cognition, I will leave up to those who know me to decide on sort of that side of things as far as I'm concerned. Flexibility, again, those who know me probably know that's an extreme weakness. But if we looked at Ian's, then obviously it would be different. You would still have strength and power, but in completely different ratios and for different reasons. Endurance would come a lot more into it. I think you were, what, 800, 1500?
Yeah.
So, we're looking at speed endurance. We're looking at a entirely different makeup. Flexibility would have been sort of like much better. And as I say, that's just something that I use with my clients. just to sort of map out, and we'll come on to another client of mine a little bit later, and he would have had a particular sort of makeup within this matrix as well. So it's just one of the tools that I actually use together with some of the functional medicine, the timelines, the matrix there, and it just helps me build up a picture. But again, we are looking very narrow beam here. We are looking at a client's nuts and bolts. Okay, Ian, next one, if you could please. Okay, this is where things really start to sort of like move out. And these are the sorts of things that we might not consider first of all, but as the slide suggests, we're not now looking at an individual tree, we're looking at the entire rainforest and everything that makes it up. So your client is one tree within this rainforest. And I've just picked out a few things here. You could probably come up with a whole list of others, but there's just a few here which have a very, very direct effect on how this client will think, what you can do for this client, how the client will react, and our interrelationship with them. So just very, very quickly, we'll move on to another, an actual client of mine in a minute, and we will see how some of these things did actually sort of come into play with him. But finances. Now, I know this is an obvious one. If we're looking at elite athletes, some of them, not all of us are fortunate enough to look after professional footballers, where finances probably wouldn't be anything of a problem. We're going to come on to a judo player client of mine. It's a non-sponsored sport. If the guy had been born in France or if he'd been born in Belgium, he'd be a superstar. But he was born in the UK. There's practically no funding for judo in this country. And this particular client spent at least 10 years living in a dormitory at Camberley Judo Club. Now, the one concession to his abilities is that he got to share with, I think it was 3 people, rather than sort of like 20 people. But believe you and me, this, I'm not exaggerating when I say this place was a rat hole. And it was only through force of personality that Danny actually sort of like moved through that and was still able to continue his sport. But that is what he required to actually be able to actually carry on with his full-time judo career. And it paid off. He became a Commonwealth Games gold medalist. But he certainly put himself through it. And there's an awful lot of others who would have gone by the wayside. Relationships. Now, this could be parents. This could be wives, husbands, girlfriends. I think we'll all be aware that if the relationship that you've got is not supportive, then carrying on our particular sport comes extremely difficult. Home life. Where is home? I've got a client down in the depths of Cornwall, and lovely part of the world, but everything for him, and he's an elite cerebral palsy footballer, and everything that they have to do coaching-wise, it's a 250-mile round trip. Peer pressure, absolute massive, particularly for adolescents. I think probably the biggest dropout rate in athletics generally is around the, and I think Ian would probably know this better than me, is probably around the 14 to 16 sort of age group, probably with girls, where the thought of actually going to the gym, going to the track X times a week, rather than clubbing and doing everything that young people do, starts to become not very sort of like attractive. So the amount of peer pressure, if everyone else is eating burgers, it's very difficult for you to actually sort of like keep to your own diet. Group dynamics. What group are they actually involved with? Is it a team sport that you're involved with? If so, how does that dynamic actually work? Really important one, involvement of other coaches. Now, you need a support system, but you know, the coach, you've all got to be on sort of like similar tracks. Employment. Obviously, have they got it? Are they old enough for it? Again, comes through to money. What's the constrictions of their employment? Education, which can have an effect in so many different ways. So one or all of these things can have a huge effect on how you're going to treat your client. When I first met Danny, just going back to finances, then there was a number of functional tests that I would love to have run with him, but there was no money to actually do it. So we had to just get by with the very, very basics. And, you know, there are compromises that you are going to have to pull around. Ian, have you got anything that you'd like to add to any of those? In addition?
I'll just throw in another example. I've just written up a case study for FSN magazine, and it was a South African football player who became vegan for, you know, ethical reasons, but he was in another city away from home. He was very miserable. He didn't go on with the coach and the group dynamics of the team. So the group dynamics is a big one. And yeah, he eventually had emotional health issues. So I've kind of written up the nutritional intervention I did with him, which was initially vegan, and then he went back home, and then it slipped into not being vegan. So everything around him is just a perfect example of this rainforest, because the rainforest was changing with him, and he wasn't able to quite stay to his core principles. So the advice I had to give had to morph as well. But yeah, you'll read that in the next FSN if you get that. And then also his psychologist, his clinical psychologist here in Johannesburg, he's writing up the next part of that in the next issue. So it's quite an interesting case.
Thank you. Click on to the next one if you could, Ian. Okay, this is Danny. This is the case in point that I was actually sort of like mentioning to you. And as I say, a lot of things with Danny was, he's a very balanced individual. That's him with the gold medal. Now, as you can see, the guy's absolutely covered with ink, and he looks every inch the fighting man that he actually is. Interestingly enough, he actually studied theology at university and is also very much into his philosophy. So we do have some very interesting conversations when we get together, which is not all about nutrition and his strength and conditioning programs, but he's reached a very, very interesting point of his career, which, if we as practitioners have got any longevity at all, is something we're going to come across time and time again with our clients. And this is retirement from elite sport or any level of sport. And the more elite it becomes, the more difficult it becomes. Danny, he's still competing, but not to the level that he was. And he's moving more. He's fortunate in a way that he has now been given the role of, I think it's UK performance coach or something similar. So he's still very, very much involved in the sport. But retirement is something that we've got to manage. Those of us who have carried out a sport ourselves, I'm on that point at the moment. How many more shows do I actually drag these old bones through? So I have got to face retirement sort of like imminently from mine. Ian, although I'm desperately trying to persuade him to come back as a Masters athlete, actually retired from track and field a while ago. So I think you'll agree, Ian, that retirement, whether it's yourself or whether it's your client, is a hell of a big transition for anyone to actually make.
It's more than a transition. It's like an identity, because elite athletes have an identity as an athlete first and foremost in their life. But if that identity has to weaken and let career take place, and, you know, getting married, having kids, all these important life events, the identity has to weaken, but in an athlete's mind, you know, the identity is still there. So it's a really tough one. I wasn't elite like these guys, but yeah, I still think about athletics every single day. And that was like 15 plus years ago that I retired. So yeah, it's a tough one.
And I think, as I'm saying, the more elite you actually become, the more difficult. If you can imagine a Premier League footballer, forget the money for a moment, that's by the by. But if you're thinking of running out each week in front of 30, 40, 50,000 people, either screaming your name or screaming abuse at you, the highs and lows that actually go along with that level of sport. Now, I'll say even Danny, he was fighting at the pinnacle of his sport, but as I say, it's very much on a lower level than professional football. But even so, he was fighting in front of big audiences all around the world. And now he's had to admit that his Olympic career is over and everything is going to be on a much sort of like lower level. I've had it, not even retirement, I've had it myself at the build up to a competition, a major competition. When I actually won the British Championship, I was second for the 2 years prior to that. So winning it was almost a sort of like a 3-year journey. And I found it very hard to get out of that mindset. Even afterwards, I was still training in the way that I was. And it was only when I tried to let it go for a while that I can distinctly remember sitting down on the sofa and just bursting into tears. Absolute crazy. No reason for it, sort of like whatsoever. So it's not surprising that many sportsmen do go through sort of mental health issues when they retire. And moving on from there, I don't know how many of you may have read Alistair Campbell's book. Alistair Campbell was the spin doctor with the Labour government some years ago. And he wrote a book called Winners. Now, it was from all walks of life. It wasn't only sportsmen, but there were a lot of sportsmen in it. But there were politicians, there were sportsmen, there were artists, all people at sort of ahead of their game. And it was noticeable, the number of them who did have mental health issues. And they were the ones who actually learned to control it. A prime example was Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill suffered famously from manic depression. And he referred to it as his black dog. But he could control it in a way that when he was having these incredible highs, he just got huge amounts of work done, but he managed to control the work that he was doing. When he was going down, then he analysed the work that he was doing. But it's not surprising because elite athletes are not normal. They are simply genetically, they are not normal. Otherwise, they would not be elite athletes. And again, this will translate itself not just to retirement, but in so many different ways that we need to be aware of. And we'll come on to that mindset in a minute when we start to discuss our role with these clients, because we are in a very, very strong, privileged position, and almost like a school teacher or something of that. We've got a position of power over these people, which can be used or abused. Okay, Ian, could we just flick through, please? Okay, this is simply another way of looking at the ecosystems. And the way that I quite often describe it to clients or other people is that we all live within our own goldfish bowls. And those goldfish bowls, the walls which contain us, could be any of those things that I've been thinking about. Lack of money might be the wall that keeps us where we are. It might be a poisonous relationship that we're in. It could be any number of things. And I think that it's part of our role, together with our clients, to try and expand those walls out as far as we can. As far as we can move those walls out, then the goldfish starts to turn into a shark. No matter how much we feed that goldfish, it will still comply to its environment. And if that environment is very small, it will remain small. There's an old phrase, surround yourself with positive people. Negative people will drag you down all the time. If you can surround yourself with positive people, you know, when you have a meeting with positive people, you come out of it thinking that you can achieve anything. You stay in the room with these soul vampires, these really negative people who will suck at your soul. You're coming out thinking that the sun's not even going to shine tomorrow, let alone you can't sort of achieve anything. So I think, again, it's part of our role to be that, within reason, of course. You've got to be realistic, but to be that positive person, to actually try and give objectives and ways for your client to expand the walls of their individual goldfish bowls to become the person that they can possibly be. We've got to give them all the tools to actually become as good as they can be. We've all got our own genetic limitations. I was never going to be better than winning the British Championship. But I've achieved far more than an awful lot of people who are much more genetically gifted than me, simply because I've taken care of some of the other things. And I'm hoping I've passed that on to some of my clients. Okay, and if we can flip that on, please. Okay, this is a huge question, I think. As we sit here, and we're all practitioners of various types, and when Ian was running through the list of people that we had attending, it does sound as though we've got a lovely mix of individuals actually listening to this. So you're all coming from your own particular skill sets, and this is one huge question that I think that we've got to ask ourselves. Where do we see our role? What are we trying to achieve for our clients? I think it's very easy. Again, take Danny, take the judo player. If I sat back and actually sort of basked in the glory, the reflected glory of his Commonwealth Games gold medalist, and I'm all over social media saying that I've achieved this with Danny, I've achieved this with that client, I think we're missing a huge part of the picture. Or are we? I haven't got any answers. I'm merely putting the question out there. What duty of care have we actually got towards our clients? Or is their performance enough? So, looking at the left-hand slide here, this is a depiction of ancient Sparta. And me and Kane have lectured on this sort of thing where we introduced the whole concept of eugenics. And ancient Sparta were perhaps the absolute prime example of performance coaching or a performance civilization, in as much as the weak, the disabled, the infirm were cast aside. And their whole reason for the existence of the Sparta city-state was war. And for a good time, they were extremely good at it. I'm not quite sure how much the film 300 actually depicted reality, but there's an awful lot actually sort of going on in there. So there you've actually got, and you could probably filter down from here, the old Eastern Bloc system. How many athletes are around now who were performing in the 70s and 80s who are now seriously broken people? Gymnasts who are having their puberty artificially held off. Female track and field athletes, female swimmers who now have got no idea whether they're Arthur or Martha because they were fed so many supplements, or they were told they were supplements, but in actual fact it was a serious drug program that they were on. And again, the whole army system from the Soviet bloc was very much along the lines, great, we've got X thousands of recruits, we can play with these guys as we will. We can use particular strength and conditioning programs. We can use certain supplementation programs. And if we happen to break several hundred, it doesn't really matter because there's going to be another few thousand coming along in the next batch. And, you know, without a doubt, that's the sort of thing that has actually gone on. I'm not saying that in the West we were an awful lot better. We were just not quite as overt about it. Someone told me, and again, Kane may well remember this because it was during one of the seminars that he put on, it cropped up. A very well-known functional medicine practitioner tells the story of the Chinese and some of the Chinese facilities having their athletes sign their bodies over to the facilities. So in the event of their death, they're actually cremated on site. So their families have not got the chance of actually performing autopsies or anything. Now, how true that is, I do not know. Does it sound feasible? Unfortunately, it does. So I'm not saying that we're going to get to the point of ancient Sparta and start putting disabled children out on the hillside, but it's a question that we need to ask ourselves, where is our role? And if we could just flick to the next slide, Ian, unless you've got anything else to add on that particular point.
I think it's a good discussion point. If anyone's got any comments, just fire through a message. You'll find the chat box and I can read it out for Paul. But you can get going in the meantime, Paul.
Okay, if you can flip it, yeah. Okay, this is the absolute ultimate question. Something called the Goldman dilemma. And Professor Goldman asked this question to a group of Olympic athletes some 15 years ago, I think. I could be wrong, but something of that order. Would you take an illegal performance-enhancing drug that was undetectable and guaranteed that you would win an Olympic gold medal, but it would kill you in 5 years? And amazingly, 52% said yes. Now, I think that comes back to what I've spoken about, the mindset of athletes, and also it comes down to their youthful nature. I think you get a slightly different perspective on these things as you start to get older, but that is an absolutely scary statistic. And if you look back over the athletes who have made the ultimate sort of like sacrifice, Flojo probably being a sort of like a prime example. Now, you know, I can't, to save me and Ian getting sued, I can't say that that was drug related, but let's just say that it was a little bit suspicious. And there's an awful lot of practices actually sort of going on. Now, my question to you as practitioners is, would you be the one to actually pass that drug across? Would you be involved if you could bask in the reflected glory of your client or clients taking gold medals? Then would you actually be privy to any practices at all that would lead to something like this? Now, obviously, this is a hell of an extreme example, but let's just open that up a little bit and let's look at a current example within football. Those of you who follow football will know that Harry Kane from Tottenham Hotspur has recently, if I remember it correctly, has ripped his hamstring off the bone and is obviously due to be out for some considerable time. Now, it appears, and I've got absolutely no inside knowledge on this, it appears that Kane was playing as many games as possible because he was effectively the ones who were scoring the vast majority of the goals for Tottenham Hotspur, the vast majority of the goals for England. So the pressure on him and the coaches around him were no doubt absolutely tremendous to keep him moving on. Now, again, my question to you is, as a nutritionist, as a strength and conditioning coach, would you push your clients for the next game, the next race, the next season, at the possible downturn of their long-term health? Or where do you draw the balance? I know in my own sport, certain times of the year, health per se does go out of the window, and I am looking purely at performance. So it is a balancing act. And as I say, it's a very, very interesting philosophical, ethical question. I saw a quote the other day, which struck me as being very interesting, that coaching, particularly for young athletes, is 25% teaching them to win, 25% teaching them to lose, and 50% teaching them life lessons. Now, I think we can probably argue the percentages there, but that's probably not too far from the truth. There is a life after athletics. Are we actually setting our clients up for a fall, or are we looking after them really sort of like long term? Okay, just move that, unless you've got anything else to add to that, Ian?
I think most of us on here probably fairly ethical practitioners, more concerned about their clients' health, I hope. I find just recreational, very keen athletes. I've got a role of trying to harness their eagerness and just pull them back, because you can see their own trajectory, self-imposed, is going to go down at some point. So it's a definite role of ours to recognize where they might be going.
Okay, let's click that over to the next one, please, Ian. Okay, this is a slide I've used before when I lectured at Kingston, and I think this is where we are together with our athletes in so many different ways. This is obviously quite literally the coalface, and we and the athletes that we look after are very much at the absolute cutting edge. I will always say that science lags behind what athletes and their coaches are actually doing at any sort of like given time. And then it starts to actually sort of like filter down. You can read as many research papers as you like, just to pick the absolute very obvious ones, on caffeine, on creatine, on beetroot juice, on what it should actually be doing. But as athletes, as coaches of athletes, we will be aware of what actually works. And this is where my, not argument with conventional science, but this is where the combination of bro science and proper science, if you like, actually sort of like crosses over. Does it work? Great. Why does it work? But does it actually work in the first place? You can read as many papers as you wish, but if it's not actually working for yourself or the guys that you're actually looking after, then it's very, very much, it's purely sort of like academic. It's interesting to know, but sort of no more than that. I don't want to dwell too much on performance enhancing areas, but obviously this is a huge area where the boundaries are being pushed all the time, and it's a constant race between those who are looking to actually catch the dopers and those who are actually sort of like doping. And it always seems that the dopers are one step ahead, and then certain tests are actually carried out and everyone gets caught. But again, this is something that me and Ian have discussed at sort of great length. There's the obvious ones that have been caught, the Ben Johnsons of this world. And there's some other very, very well-known household names that I won't mention that we have a huge amount of suspicion over, and particularly with the ecosystem that they're actually sort of like working in. So this is very much how I see elite athletes, and this is how I see us as looking after elite athletes as very much canaries in the coal mine. And every so often, as that poor bird there, one or two of us will actually sort of like go over. Okay, click on to the next one, please, Ian. Okay, and I just want to touch, to say that hour has absolutely flown by, so I just want to touch on this. And this is something that I'm starting, again, probably due to my age, I'm starting to actually think about more and more, not actual hospitals, but when my father died of cancer some 8-9 years ago, then obviously I had very much first-hand experience of the health system. And my mum, God bless her, is 94. And as you can imagine, we're going around to a good number of health establishments at the moment. You know, she's well, but at that age, things are starting to actually fall off. And the system is bust. Whichever way that you actually put it, it is not a question of money. It is people not looking after themselves to a large extent. Obesity and type 2 diabetes by themselves will bankrupt the NHS, no problems whatsoever. And everyone, to use this horrible American phrase, all the politicians are just kicking the can sort of like further down the road. Now, my question is that the skill sets that we actually have, both with ourselves and with our athletes, can and should we actually be using these for the benefit of people sort of outside? I think this whole longevity, the whole masters athlete scene has become huge as time goes on. And again, me and Ian were talking about this before we actually came on live. So masters athletes is becoming on huge, and this whole health span, as we're calling it, as opposed to lifespan, again, is growing and growing and growing. People are living longer, but people are also living the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years of their lives in some sort of disease state. With the knowledge that we're actually obtaining, do we owe it to ourselves? Do we owe it to others to actually push that out there? Because believe you and me, guys, we're at the cutting edge. Your GP is not going to know what we know. You talk to your GP about diet. You talk to your GP about supplementation. You're talking about type 2 diabetes. It's going to be metformin straight away. You talk about cholesterol. It's going to be statins straight away. There's a better way forward. And I think, again, it's a question, it's not an answer. Do we need to be moving that forward? Ian, you asked for 5 minutes and just about to like push that through.
Brilliant, thank you, Paul. I'll just, within the health span and the disease sector, I'll just add on that I think as we evolve as practitioners, we naturally build up that skill set to be able to deal with dis-ease or health imbalances. So, I've always had the intention of being a sports practitioner, but I've been dealing with a huge amount of autoimmunity the last 2, 3, 4 years, which has been in a lot of sports people, but a lot of non-sports people as well. So yeah, you're right, they say, Paul, it's building your skill set and becoming adaptable as a practitioner. Okay, so I'm going to just open it up. Any questions, any comments? As I said earlier, just put it in the message board. And yeah, if you want to say a bit more, you can unmute and ask Paul some questions. And I know that takes a wee minute to come through, so I'm going to move on to the next slide as well. So you've just had a free webinar from us, compliments of Paul, so thank you very much. Gives you an indication of, you know, a teaser of Paul's lecture later in the year as well. So we are obviously in the promotional phases of the course, and we start in April. So I think it's April 21st in Kingston that we'll be doing the live module 1. And then at the start of June, we start the online intake as well, once we've done the video and editing and stuff. So I just want to give you prices. If any of you have been thinking, okay, this might be an interesting course to do. So full price of the course is 2.3. It's for 3 modules. All the information's on the website to get the full rundown of the course. You're still in the early bird stage. So up until a couple of weeks' time, it's going to be early bird for the live course. Up until the start of April, be early bird for the online. And then we've got 10% off that for Band to Bases members, 40 for students. So anyone in their final year of study or in postgrad is obviously of a related area is good to come on. And then we're also doing a payment plan. If you're like, oh, okay, it's a bit too much in one go, you can spread out over 12 months. But I said I would do a little offer for you guys that attended tonight. So we're going to add this in as well. So for anyone who's on right now, you can take a note of this code at the bottom and you can get an additional 10% off the prices I've given you tonight. If you're watching as a recording later, sorry, you weren't quick enough, but you can still get a 5%. So if you are interested and you're like, okay, you've been sitting on the fence a bit in the course, but yeah, okay, the finances look a bit better now. Go onto our course page. So it's the CISN course within the website. And there's an expression of interest form at the bottom, but it also pops up about after 20 seconds or so. You just need to fill in your details with the code on there by midday UK time tomorrow, okay? Then you get the 10%. After that, you get 5%. Okay, and here's the course, the website information and all the social media. Okay, so if anyone's got any questions for Paul, fire them over. Anyone's got any questions of the course, fire them over and I'll answer them as well. And I just want to say thank you very much to all of you who have come on. We attract a very unique set of people in the kind of material we do because we're focusing very much on the functional stroke integrative thinking. And there's not many of that, not many people who do that within sports. So yeah, thanks for having the open mind to understand what we're trying to do here. Okay, Paul, you got any last comments or before we finish?
There's so many things that we could sort of like go over. It was interesting, I saw a quote the other day. We've spoken about philosophy, we haven't got too heavy on it, but you know me, I like to actually include a few things from Hippocrates when I'm actually sort of lecturing. I saw something the other day to go to show that philosophy and mindfulness can come from some strange, now everyone may know this, but it was a new one on me, but there's a kiddies cartoon Kung Fu Panda, which I'm sure people with children will know. And there was a wonderful one in there. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift, which is why it is called the present. And I think that is just something that, let's concentrate on what we can. This is something I'll try and put across to my clients, that if they've got problems, concentrate on that which you can solve, that which you can influence. That which you can't influence, I know it's easier said than done, then not a lot you can actually sort of like do about it. But everything that we've spoken about, there's so many different sub-layers, substrates to all of this. The interrelationship that we could have with each other. We've obviously got the Facebook page for the group. I think that's probably a little bit underutilised, I would say, but please don't think that we've got to work in isolation. I'm very lucky that I've got some wonderful people around me, even though I've got it's a wide knowledge base, but not particularly sort of like deep. So I can talk my way through strength and conditioning, I can talk my way through nutritional therapy, I can talk my way through functional medicine, but when I really need an expert, then I know who to go to, and I have got that support system around me. And I would say try and develop that. Try and develop your own skill sets. I think that is important. Something we touched on before my internet crashed last time round. I think that for all of us, we can't live in our own little boxes too much. If we're talking about nutritional therapy, it's nice to know the actual effects that has from a strength and conditioning point of view. For the strength and conditioning specialist, it's nice to know from a functional medicine point of view the effects that will have outside of the skeletal muscular system. So as many avenues as we can actually sort of like work on. That's why it's been incredible for me to actually meet and interact with people like Pete, with Ian, with Kane, with Amaru, to actually sort of spread myself, but to also have these guys in the background and sort of a number of others that I can relate to, that I can speak to, knowing that they're not going to try and come in and steal the clients, but we can actually work together and actually come up with, it is a community, and to actually use that community to actually come up with answers for our clients. It's got to be far better than it working in isolation.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, and thanks to everyone again. And we will be doing another webinar with Henrietta Paxton. You might remember her, Paul, from last year, the pole vaulter and nutritional therapist. So she's up in about 3 weeks' time. So look out for notices about that as well. Okay, so good night from me. Like the two Ronnies said, good night from me and good night from him.
Okay, thanks very much indeed, Ian. Thanks very much for everyone who joined in.
Cool. Take care, guys. Bye for now.
Okay, cheers. Bye all.